Thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you all here, and thank you for those of us joining on DGov. Just a reminder, if you would like to speak during public participation or during one of our public hearings, we would really appreciate it if you'd sign up at one of the signs down below so that we can plan our meeting accordingly. Ms. Phillips, may we have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Councilor Baxter?
Here.
Councilor Patine?
Here.
Councilor Noseworthy? Present. Mayor Pro Tem Bricky?
Here.
Mayor Houston?
Here. Okay, we have no proclamations or presentations tonight, so we're going to move right into the consent agenda. And just a reminder for everyone, the consent agenda is intended to allow the council by a single motion to approve matters that are considered routine or non-controversial. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member requests that an item be removed from the consent agenda. Any of those items will be considered separately in item number 6. Ms. Phillips, will you please read the consent agenda for us?
Items 4.1 and 4.2 are approval of minutes. 4.1, study session of April 23rd, 2019. 4.2, the regular meeting of May 7th, 2019. Item 4.3 is a request for public hearing with a proposed date of May 28th, 2019 to consider an ordinance authorizing the issuance of 2019 certificates of participation. Item 4.4 is a request for public hearing with a proposed date of June 4th, 2019 to consider text amendments to the Storm Drainage Design Criteria Manual. Item 4.5 is final approval of Ordinance O 2019-14 authorizing the transfer and conveyance of Lot 1A of the Lot 1 subdivision at Free Springs Village to the Volunteers of America National Services for the purposes of building low-income senior housing and declaring an effective date.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Do we have any council that would like to remove an item from the consent agenda tonight? Okay, seeing none. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second? She was second. Definitely first.
Okay. Ms. Phillips, may we have a roll call?
Councilor Patine?
Yes.
Councilor Baxter?
Yes.
Councilor Noseworthy? Yes. Mayor Pro Tem Bricky?
Yes.
Mayor Houston?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, public participation this evening. This section of the agenda is set aside for people who would like to participate and provide comments or questions regarding items that are not otherwise on the agenda. When I call you forward, please join us at the podium, state your name and address. We're limiting a speaking time to 3 minutes, and at 2.5 minutes, our city manager will give you a warning with raising his hand. May we please have Marilyn Wolke, please? Okay. Ross and Ellen, please. Yes.
We may have signed up for the wrong thing.
Is this, this is for the,
This perhaps is the planning.
I think it was
issue.
planning.
okay, I will keep this for that. Yeah, thank you.
That's both parties.
Okay. So no other public participation? No one else would like to speak tonight? Okay. Moving on to public hearings. We have one legislative and policy-related hearing tonight. May I remind you, if anyone wishes to speak during the public hearings, please write your name and address on the form below, as we said. And I would just going to briefly review the ground rules for you, please. The City Council previously directed staff to publish notice of public hearings for each of the hearing listed below. The following proposed ordinances or topics have been set for public hearing at this meeting. The issues we deal with in this section of the agenda are of a legislative or policy nature. Public hearings are an opportunity for citizens to provide formal input into the City Council's decision-making process. The format for the hearing is organized to ensure transparency and fairness for all. The City Council, we welcome all public testimony, but we request that it be relevant to the issue at hand. Citizens wishing to speak shall sign in and will speak for 33 minutes, please, not 30. Going on to item 8.1.1. A public hearing to consider amendments to Chapter 23 of the City of Durango Code of Ordinances increasing the city sales and use tax pursuant to voter approval at the April 2nd, 2019 election for the purposes specified in the ballot question. I'd like to invite city staff to the podium to provide a presentation of the facts.
I think since Julie's not, do you want to take this one? Okay.
I can do it, Dirk, and if you want to add in, feel free to do that. Our finance director is not here tonight, but the item before you is to recognize that the voters approved a 1/2 cent sales tax, and that becomes effective on July the 1st. So this item is asking the city council to direct the city attorney to prepare an ordinance that would be introduced later for your consideration that would amend our code that'll provide for that extra 1/2 cent sales tax.
Yeah, and I would just add that the ordinance will include the limitations that were contained in the ballot language, including the time that it was effective, the 10-year limit on its effectiveness, and the purposes for which it was to be used, and for the approach that we would use a citizen input committee to make recommendations. This is sort of a housekeeping thing. The charter requires an ordinance to be adopted to impose the tax. I think that's about it. Oh, and just timing-wise, we are planning to have the first reading on June 4th, which is the next regular meeting, second meeting in June, so it will be effective before July 1 when the tax is authorized to be imposed.
Thank you. Do we have any public testimony?
We do not.
Okay. I will close the public testimony. Do we have questions by council for staff, citizens, or anyone else? Okay. I will close the public hearing and open the discussion for council. Do we have any discussion? We are a very vocal board tonight, council tonight. Okay. Then do I have a motion to approve item 8.1.1?
I'll make a motion to direct the city attorney to prepare an ordinance to be introduced at the next regularly scheduled city council meeting to consider amendments to chapter 23 of the City of Durango Code of Ordinances increasing sales and use taxes pursuant to voter approval at the April 2nd, 2019 election for the purpose specified in the ballot question.
Second.
Any further discussion by council? Ms. Phillips, may we have a roll call?
Councilor Bricky,
Yes.
Councilor Bateen,
Yes.
Councilor Baxter,
Yes.
Councilor Noseworthy,
Yes.
Mayor Youssef.
Yes. Moving on to our quasi-judicial public hearings, we have 2 tonight. Before we start, I will review the ground rules. Quasi-judicial hearings require a legal process in which facts and opinions are presented to the city council who serve as unbiased decision makers. During the quasi-judicial hearings, the city council sits as a collective judge of the issues, not as a legislative body. The applicant has the burden of proof in these proceedings and must present testimony or evidence to support the request. Accordingly, the process the city council follows with these hearings is somewhat different than the process followed with respect to legislative and policy-related hearings. We welcome all public testimony. Again, we request that it be relevant to the issue at hand, and you can, if you'd like to speak, you can sign up on the form which I have here. Item 8.2.1, a public hearing to consider the Mountain Trace 2 and Timber Trails PD rezoning, row abandonment, and PD conceptual plan. We have
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for joining us.
Craig Roser with the City Planning Department. This is a public hearing to consider a request from Mountain Trace Holdings LLC, represented tonight by Elizabeth Boone with Reynolds Ash and Associates Architects in town. This is for consideration of a variety of different issues associated with the proposed development of what's referred to as the former Inge and Scott properties. These properties are located immediately adjacent to the Mountain Trace townhome development off of Metz Lane, and the properties are addressed as 250 Metz Lane for the Inge property and 1711 Florida Road for the Scott property. As I said, a variety of issues are being considered tonight, including rezoning of these 2 properties from current zoning designations of planned development, which is the zoning of the Inge property, and that's reflective of a prior multifamily development that was approved in the late 2005-2006 era. on the Ingy property and rezoning of the Scott property, which is now medium-density residential to planned development. The second consideration is abandonment of a small cul-de-sac that was previously platted but has never been developed. This was public street right-of-way that was intended for the Pinions planned development. That was the PD that was approved on the Ingy property, and it's no longer being necessary for the project that's before you under this last consideration, and that is consideration of a conceptual development plan for a planned development for the proposed development of the two properties. And those developments are being known as the Mountain Trace 2 development and Timber Trails. The Planning Commission heard these items at their April 22nd meeting. The rezoning and right-of-way abandonment considerations are relatively straightforward and not considered problematic. The public comment at that night focused mostly on the conceptual development plan and issues related to that development, including the overall project density and number of units that were being proposed, possible traffic impacts from the proposed development, the adequacy of snow storage areas within the development, adequacy of project amenities for residents, and building design considerations. Following pretty substantial discussion, the Planning Commission, with separate motions and votes on each of the items being considered, voted 5-0 to recommend approval of the rezoning, the right-of-way abandonment, and the conceptual development plan, subject to various findings and conditions as stated in the staff report, and as amended with respect to the conceptual plan by the Planning Commission that night. Attached to your agenda documentation, you've got the vicinity map, which is on the screen, the Planning Commission staff report with all the attachments that were available for the April 22nd meeting, the draft Planning Commission minutes of that meeting, and a sheet that lists all of the 23 recommended conditions of approval as modified by the Planning Commission that night. As far as fiscal impact, there's no fiscal or budgetary impact associated with this public hearing tonight. Following completion of the planned development process and with the build-out of the project, the city will realize some increased revenues through development fees, such as building permit fees, utility plant investment fees, Golden Park, and street dedications, those types of things. And will incur typical costs associated with servicing the development. The project considerations, all three of them, have been determined to be in conformance with the city's comprehensive plan and land use development code requirements for each of the considerations. And it's the recommendation of the Planning Commission that the council by motion approve the Mountain Trace 2 and Timber Trails rezoning, right-of-way abandonment, and planned development conceptual plan, subject to the findings and conditions as recommended by the Planning Commission as reflected in the Planning Commission staff report and minutes of April 22nd, 2019, and further direct the city attorney to prepare the rezoning and right-of-way abandonment ordinances to be finalized as part of the planned development final plan consideration. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail describing this project. I think Elizabeth Boone has a presentation she wants to give you tonight, but I want to give you just a little bit of background and go through a little bit of the history on this. The property that's on the screen is the property under consideration, the two projects in blue. I don't know where my cursor is here. There it kind of is. The Mountain Trace project is immediately to the west of the subject properties. The current applicants are the developers of the Mountain Trace property, and that's why the Mountain Trace 2 development is essentially a design extension of Mountain Trace 1. It's additional townhome units that are being proposed. This gives you a little bit of the context of the area. County Road 250, East Animas Road, is to the west. This is the intersection with County Road 250 and County Road 252, 32nd Street. This is Metz Lane that extends into the project site. This portion of Metz Lane was developed and constructed to city street standards as part of the Mountain Trace 1 development. So the developers of Mountain Trace 1 have done that road extension. These are the two properties that are proposed to be rezoned. The Ingy property is the westernmost property. The Scott property is the easternmost property. The Ingy property is the one that had the prior plan development approval on it, and the Scott property never had a development plan, but is currently zoned residential medium density, which is the comprehensive plan designation for the area. At the time this property was annexed, it was part of a 4-tract annexation, the Inge, Gass, Shocher, and Scott annexations to the city. This is the Inge property, this is the Scott property, this is the Gass and Shocher properties down here. But one of the things that's important is with the development that was proposed on the Inge property, the Pinions project, one of the considerations was the requirement that Metz Lane be extended through the property and all the way back out to Florida Road to provide multiple street connections for the development in this area. And that's going to be a requirement of the current project that's before you, that before it gets, as part of the final approval, there will be a requirement that Metz Lane be constructed all the way back out to Florida Road. Right of way for that connection and that extension was dedicated as part of the annexation, so the right of way is in place. This little cul-de-sac right here is Pinion Lane, and that is the cul-de-sac and right-of-way that is part of the right-of-way abandonment consideration tonight. The right-of-way abandonment will do nothing to affect the extension of Metz Lane back out to Florida Road and the intersection with Florida Road. So it's only this Pinion Lane that was platted to serve what was then proposed for the Inge property and eventual future development on the Scott property. That's the only bit of right-of-way that is being abandoned at this point in time. This just gives you an idea of what was previously proposed on the Inge property. This is the Pinions planned development. It was a 20-unit project, residential project consisting of duplex units, some 3-plex townhome units down in this area, and 2 home sites located on the upper reaches of the property, accessed and served by that street that was proposed to serve that Pinion Lane. That development approval, although it reached the final approval stage, has long expired, and so that's the reason why we have to go back through a rezoning of the property to essentially vacate the Pinions PD and create the new PD for the Mountain Trace 2 Pinions project. This is the conceptual development plan that's being proposed for consideration tonight. This is the development that the applicants are proposing for the Inge Scott property. This shows the extension of Metz Lane through the property and back out to Florida Road. And again, that will be a requirement of development. The Mountain Trace 2 project is located in this general area. It is proposed right now to be 24 residential townhome units of a very similar design to the residential townhome units in the adjacent Mountain Trace 1 development. Mountain Trace 1 has a total of 84 residential townhome units. It was originally approved for 78, and about a year ago, the Planning Commission and City Council approved an additional 6 units in Mountain Trace 1. This project, as I said, Mountain Trace 2 in this area is an additional 24 townhome units at the conceptual plan stage. That density will not exceed that, or that number of units will not exceed that. It may actually go down depending on the actual design of the project. This is the Timber Trails portion of the project, which is on the uphill side of the Metz Lane extension. That's proposed right now to be 23 additional residential units in a mixture of detached single-family homes and at least 1 duplex structure in that area. Both Mountain Trace 1 and the Timber Trails portions will be served by a private access system to be developed and maintained, or be maintained by a homeowners association following final approval. This, you may recall, if you were on the council when they did the extension or the additional units in Mountain Trace 1, one of the benefits seen was they were going to provide for a continued access through the project to link multiple ways in and out of Mountain Trace 1 through this Mountain Trace 2 development. So that's the general conceptual plan that's being presented tonight. This is a general idea of the kinds of units that are being proposed in the Mountain Trace development. This again is an extension of the Mountain Trace 1 development proposal. that really is about all I have as far as my presentation right now. I'm available to answer any questions either now or at the conclusion of public testimony. I do want to acknowledge that I believe council received a letter today from Marilyn Wolke, and hopefully you have a copy of it. Ms. Wolke and her husband Ken live on Allen Road, which is a private street in close proximity to the development. The Wolkes presented some testimony at the Planning Commission hearing, and they have requested and did request before the Planning Commission consideration of having the perimeter boundary of the development, especially the perimeter boundary adjacent to the Allen Road neighborhood. This is Allen Road going back in here, having fencing established along that. We at the staff level considered that before we took it to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission also considered it that night. As outlined and addressed in the staff report, at least at this point in time, the staff, in lieu of fencing, is recommending that there only be some signage of the perimeter boundaries to identify what that perimeter is, and that anything beyond is private property. The concern we have with fencing is it may create more visual impacts and loss of vegetation on the steep hillsides. There may also be some problems as far as wildlife management control. So we recognize the concerns that the Wolkes have. We've attempted to address that by one of the conditions of approval, and that being signing of the perimeter boundaries prior to the final approval rather than full-blown fencing.
Great. Thank you. Did you say that someone else was going to speak?
The developer's representative is here, and I'm sure she has a more thorough presentation about the overall project and then the public, and I'm available right now or later for any questions you might have.
I got a couple starter questions.
Okay, sure.
Well, you're probably the one that can point out where that fence would be if it were to be. And another thing I think for the public and for other members of council, if we could show where that connection, just kind of trace that connection to Florida Road, which I think is a huge component of this
Sure.
project.
Yeah, this is on the, this is the conceptual plan itself. This is the perimeter boundary. This is a portion of Phase 1, Mountain Trace Phase 1, right in this area. This is private property that's owned by the residents down on Allen Road. One of the big concerns when the Mountain Trace development came through many years ago was voiced by the Allen Road residents who had concerns about trespass and impacts that the Mountain Trace development might have on the Allen Road neighborhood. And as a result of that, pretty much this entire hillside area was determined to be maintained as open space and not have any amenities, recreational amenities or anything else associated with it to try to reduce the potential impacts. I think the Wolkes' concerns arose from an earlier depiction of the project, but even this shows a trail connection extending onto the Mountain Trace 1 project and potentially down towards Allen Road that they're concerned with. And also earlier iterations of the project had some picnic areas or amenities up on this rim area that extended over onto the private property. So their concerns just have been that they want to make sure that the residents of this development know what the boundaries of the development are and don't infringe elsewhere. My assumption is their major concern has to do with this northern boundary line that affects them the most, but it was a proposal just to provide or require perimeter fencing. And again, because of the steepness of the hillside, because of the amount of vegetation, we think that the trespass issue, if properly signed, can be handled in that way and not create any potential issues or problems.
So Craig, follow up on that, then this bullet, one of the planning commission conditions, item 3, bullet 5, was that deletion, the depiction of a trail to the picnic area in Mountain Trace 1 be eliminated.
Yeah.
So is that not only graphically, but realistically?
Yeah, we would be looking for that at the preliminary plan stage. It was still shown on the conceptual plan map, the latest iteration, this little area in here, and I think That makes the Wokies a bit nervous. I would
Right.
refer to them when Marilyn provides her testimony. But we would expect, and the basis of that condition was that future submittals, when this comes back at the preliminary plan stage, does not show any possible connection with that trail, unless they go through an amendment to the Phase 1 project to have trails and amenities in that portion that was reserved as open space as part of that PD.
Yeah.
Okay, then your other question, Dean, had to do with just where
I just
the,
want to, yeah, just for curiosity, see how that road connects more, little bigger picture of
yeah,
that.
let me try to find the
That's a significant improvement for that entire area.
Yeah, again, this is right at the westerly edge. This is the intersection with County Road 250, County Road 234, 32nd, or 232, 32nd Street in East Animas, and Metz Lane comes in there. This is a signed, controlled four-way stop intersection. The proposal is Metz Lane comes in like this. This is a cul-de-sac. This is Allen Road taking off from that, but it now extends back to the east and is developed, and then it would extend through the former Ingy property and bend out this way.
Can you
and then come-
expand that? It might make it easier to see the cursor because.
You know, I
Pointer's
really,
not working.
I really can't.
Totally disappointed.
I'm sorry, Kim, I can't, but it will come back out right down between what is addressed as 1689 Florida Road and 1715 Florida Road, County Road 250. And that's right of way, again, that was platted as part of the annexation in anticipation of this road coming back out, and provide multiple ways to get in and out of all of the Mountain Trace development and anything else that might happen on those properties.
And as I understand, that will be completed as part of this proposed.
That will be, this connection will be made, and whatever intersection improvements might be necessary out here will be made as a part of the development of these projects.
And that's subject to a potential transportation study, or?
Yeah, the information, we asked for and received some preliminary traffic information as part of the conceptual plan. Typically, that comes in later in the process, but we knew traffic was a concern regarding this development. Those traffic numbers indicate that the intersection at 250 Florida Road and Metz Lane is functioning acceptably. There are no improvements necessary there. But the numbers we've got right now indicate that there may be some requirement for some level of improvement to the intersection where it comes back out onto Florida Road. The full extent of those intersection improvements will be identified as part of the preliminary plan approval. The city engineer has asked for some additional information and some additional evaluations to determine what exactly might be necessary, or if in fact intersection improvements will be necessary as part of this. But right now it looks like they will. We've tried to condition this that they provide the information we need to make that determination as part of the preliminary plan submittal, provide designs if improvements are going to be necessary at the preliminary plan stage, and those will be expected to be done as part of construction of this project.
Very good, thank you.
This is great that this picture's up here. So the blue is pretty self-explanatory, but the orange line that goes down and then to Allen Road and then around that house and back around, what does that orange line delineate?
That's the existing city limits.
Okay.
The line right here.
So
That's the existing city limit.
and so the Mountain Trace 1, is that the red line?
Mountain Trace is this project right here.
Yeah, but the perimeter line for it, is that?
It includes this area up here. Yeah, this is the right of way,
Can't see that.
I can't see.
that red,
You can't see what you're pointing at.
where the number 225 is.
Okay.
That's phase one. There are now 3 units to be built in this area, but all of this area beyond those units was to be maintained as open space, basically.
So the 225 is Mountain Trace 1, if I heard you.
225 is a number that was assigned to the units that were approved for that portion of it. But they're back right off of Metz Lane, not.
Correct.
not in the
I just wanted to
Yeah.
know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. one of the letters indicated that it's a multi-generational community, and there was a concern for children. Is there any consideration for slowing the traffic in that area, either through speed dips or anything there?
Well, there's some pretty natural traffic calming with the intersections and the bends in the road. At Allen Road, right here where this little cul-de-sac is and Allen Road takes off, that's a controlled signed intersection. We really haven't looked in terms of things like speed bumps or anything like that as far as the rest of the project, but it's not straight shots that lend themselves to a lot of speed. Certainly there'll be speed limit signs. It would be considered a local street with the typical local street speed limit. We really haven't looked that much detail, to be honest with you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Would you like to, are we going to follow up with the developer to present? Thank you.
Great. Elizabeth Boone with Reynolds Ashton Associates, 1140 Main Avenue. And Greg always does a great job introducing the project, so I just want to touch on some important design points about this development. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to be here to share our conceptual plan tonight. We've worked very hard on this closely with the city to come up with what we feel is a strong design that responds well to the need in our community right now. So, really what we are aiming for is modest homes at modest prices, and a way to achieve that is really about density and creative solutions to site constraints. So we feel that this proposal really captures that. So just a little background. Craig had mentioned we're 2 phases, so this is Mountain Trace 1. It includes a driveway that connects with the original Mountain Trace. And then we have timber trails here. And looking at the required parking at 69 stalls, we've provided above and beyond that. And we've worked closely with the city to try to determine guest parking and then achieve even more than that. And I also want to note that there's on-street parking along Metz Lane, which runs right here. And Metz Lane will be developed to city street standards, so that includes sidewalks and street trees. We aim to be a really quality development and have looked at some of the residential portions of Three Springs, for examples. So we want to provide community amenities, and those would include sidewalks connected to a trail network, potentially a community garden or some type of playground. And then we've designed the pond in a way that that space could also function as a play area when not in use for retention. So here's a rendered site plan. We see a lot of buffer along the southern portion of the property line where we have adjacent neighbors. We have a really great natural buffer of scrub oak to the north of us, as well as a steep slope. And then we've also done some preliminary studies in terms of tree removal and replacement with the city. So total of 57 units, as Craig mentioned. We do have some steep slopes on the site, and that has been part of our site constraint, being sensitive to both the 20 and 30% slopes, but have come up with a solution that city staff feels is appropriate given the slopes on the site. Here's the protected tree diagram as mentioned. And then just understanding some of the concerns from the neighbors regarding ridgeline encroachment. We've been very careful to keep the units off of the ridgeline, and then also to protect the trees and scrub oak along that ridgeline, which to help block the view. So here's some sort of diagrammatic views of existing Allen Road, view from Allen Road, so maintaining, this is schematic, so we would be maintaining a lot of that scrub oak. And then just as you start to elevate above Allen Road, you can see a couple little hints at roof lines, but it's not until you're up at that ridge line that you start to see those units. So they're pretty well tucked into the hillside in order to sort of disguise them and reduce their visibility. Within Mountain Trace 2, we have 3 unit types. These are very similar to the units that are being built at Mountain Trace right now, with the exception that we've added 1 additional unit. This is a single-car garage unit and is modest in size, similar to the 1-bedroom, 2-car garage unit, but trying to expand our offering of smaller-sized homes in that area. And then here is, as Craig mentioned, that elevation of what those units look like. We have a couple different color schemes out there. This is 2 of those color schemes. Within Timber Trails, we have 6 different unit types and then 3 different elevation styles per unit type. But this is really responding to the city's request to create a variety of units, to create quality elevations, to create interest in facades, and really create a vibrant neighborhood that doesn't feel like a repeating model over and over again. We have Russell Planning and Engineering here as well, and they have done preliminary grading and drainage studies as sort of conceptual level resolution of our plan, as well as a conceptual pond design. And this has come a long way. We started this process with a pond that had walls and was not very inviting to the community, and have since worked out a way to remove the walls and then sort of step or slope the sides so that it feels like a more inviting space for the neighborhood. It would, of course, still function as retention, but when not in use as a retention pond, could be a play area, a little walking track. But we were sort of seeing that as a feature and trying to be creative about some of our constraints in order to create a quality neighborhood. Snow storage has been an ongoing conversation. Philip could speak a little bit more to this, but we've been very sensitive about the amount of snow that we've received this year and how to store snow from similar events in a responsible way that doesn't impede on resident driveways or circulation or emergency access or the development. And so we've produced a couple example diagrams, and there's still an additional level of detail that we'll get into in the next phase regarding how that snow melts and is drained away. But sort of a conceptual level, we feel that we've provided adequate storage for snow that would accumulate within the roadways. One of the comments that came up at the Planning Commission meeting was regarding the end units within Mountain Trace 2. So in Mountain Trace 1, at either end of the building, we have a 2-story unit with a garage on the bottom and then a single living area above. And the city has asked that we keep sort of a similar massing step within our new Mountain Trace 2 development. But looking at sort of the constraints on our site, there's a couple areas where we are pinched up against the property lines or against parking areas that preclude us from using a shorter unit that's elongated. So instead we're using a less deep unit that's 3 stories. And what we proposed to the city and what is included in some of the conditions is that maybe rather than a 2-story unit, we come up with a way to step the massing down in a creative way that the city approves of in order to reduce that volume. So whether that be carports as shown in this example, or some type of additional shed or eyebrow or massing shift, that maybe there's other ways to do that without prescribing that this has to be a 2-story solution. So just to address a couple other open items, I believe that we're still addressing some of the traffic studies and concerns that have come up, but have conceptually agreed that the street of Metz Lane would continue down to Florida Road, and we're studying that intersection design. And then also the trail, which impedes on the adjacent Mountain Trace 1 property, would be revised so that it was completely contained within Mountain Trace 2 Timber Trails property. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that you all may have.
Thank you. Any questions from council?
Just a quick one. Ms. Boone, are there shared amenities with Mountain Trace 1?
There are. So there is an existing sidewalk that continues into Mountain Trace 1. And then there is also a playground structure that's set to be built within the open space of Mountain Trace 1. And so we've discussed potentially a community garden to broaden that offering, but I would be open to feedback on that.
I believe you mentioned that affordability is a criteria, and I was just curious, how does moving to 3 stories, how will that affect the affordability of the units?
In total, it's still the same square footage. So it's basically the same unit, it's just stacked vertically so that we can take up a smaller footprint.
And any impact on the neighbors with any kind of view or anything like that?
This is a pretty unique site in that we're sort of nestled back into this hillside. And so a lot of the units are designed in a way that they are recessed into the hillside. So we typically have parking low and living up high in a way that we're not creating too much additional height that impedes on the neighbors or views of the property.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, great, thank you very much. I'd like to start the public testimony part of the hearing, and I believe we have a few people who might want to speak here. Mr. Ross and Ellen Pasks, would you like to speak now? Is this? Oh, yes, okay, sorry. Thank you.
If you don't mind, I will read mine. So,
Will you please state your name and address for the record?
we are Ross and Ellen Park. We live at 152 Metz Lane. We bought that and we live there as a full-time occupant. We purchased it in 2018. Again, we're not part of any of the concepts here that you're talking about tonight, but on the entryway into getting into Metz Lane, down to that concept. Concerning our issues, we submitted and we read our comments at the Planning Commission amendment session held September the 24th of 2018. Although we weren't able to attend the April 22nd, 2019, we did send comments as well to Craig to be included for that. First, we must say that we're very gratified by both the developers and the Durango City officials that have taken seriously the traffic and safety concerns of the Metz Lanes property owners. As you've heard, there's a considerable amount of new families that are moving in, again, intergenerational, as you pointed out. And that's important to us as again, property owners there. I hope it's important to you, but we think it is. Our initial concern is related to an increased traffic on Metz Lane, specifically at the County Road 250 intersection, as the Mountain Trace and Timber Trail properties are built out and fully occupied. It seems when I come to each of these meetings, I get a different number as far as the numbers that are being added there, so I can't give you an accurate number from this point. But we've recently been informed by Craig Rozier, who you heard from tonight, that based upon information currently available, including preliminary traffic information provided as part of the conceptual plan submittal, the four-way stop intersection at Metz Lane and East Animas and 32nd is functioning at an acceptable level of service and will continue to do so with anticipated increased traffic from the proposed development. However, additional traffic information, and he said that tonight, will be provided at the preliminary plan stage, and warrants for intersectional improvements will continue to be evaluated at this time. We urge the City Council and the Planning Commission to ensure that these follow-on traffic measurements are completed and analyzed and acted upon, and that they include estimates for the increased capacity and traffic load anticipated with the ongoing expansion of the Durango Durango Firehouse Number 3, located just immediately to our west down 32nd Street. Our second concern involves access to and from Metz Lane community in an emergency situation. At present, the single viable access and exit from our properties for families and emergency equipment is only via 32nd Street. Planning Commission recommendation number 8, dated April 22nd of 2019, states that the Metz Lane street extension to Florida Road shall be required as part of the initial development activity. You heard that tonight, within Mountain Trace and Timberline Trails. And at least initial completion of street improvement will need to be in place before unit construction activity begins within that project. Our question is, with the full access, will full access remain from Metz Lane to Florida Road, both during and after the completion of the project? And again, what's being put in place there as far as the intersection with Florida Road? Is that a light? Is that, again, a four-way stop? Is it a two-way stop? We don't know at this point, and we'd like to know. In advance, we thank the Durango Planning Commission and City Council for their attention to ensuring the safety of your residents in a very growing and very dramatic Metz Lane neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sure.
Would you like a copy of that, or do you have it already?
Yes.
Split one for the record if you like. That's great.
And it is in our packet, by the way.
And just in case, Ms. Wilkie, would you like an opportunity to speak?
So I'm Marilyn Wolke, my husband Ken and I live at 163 Allen Road. And I'm sure you've read all my information and my letters that we've been sending. And, but I'm still concerned that the applicant is still mixing Mountain Trace 1 with Mountain Trace 2 amenities. She just said that the playground would be for both of them and community garden. And so it becomes an issue with liability. You mix everything up, who takes responsibility if anything goes wrong? And I'm not getting that the applicant is going to keep Mountain Trace 1 separate from Mountain Trace 2 timber trails. And I would like that to be a definite, and if not, I think the fence would resolve that issue. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
If you had any questions.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. Okay, I believe that's all for public testimony, so I will close the public testimony at this time. Do we have any questions by council?
I do, actually. I was going to ask Craig, Mr. Rozier, I'm sorry, I'm used to the Planning Commission. Could you explain a little bit about the fair share arrangement with this?
Yeah, this is subject to the city's fair share requirement for providing affordable, attainable housing. We've had just some very preliminary discussions at the conceptual level with the applicants. There is a fair share agreement in place for Mountain Trace 1 that requires the provision of units, but also has a clause that if they can't find qualified buyers for units in the project, they can then pay the in lieu fee. My anticipation is a similar arrangement would be done for these projects, and that gets finalized as part of the final plan approvals. It's incorporated in the plan development agreement, which the city and the developers enter into. The PD zone is basically a contractual zone specific to a site and specific to a development proposal.
So is the fair share based upon number of bedrooms, essentially?
Yeah, and number of units, and there's a formula that indicates how many units will need to be provided, and Amanda, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's the way it's set up.
It's a number of units.
Yeah.
Number of units, okay. Thank you.
I'll ask while you're up here,
Sure.
too, if you can address the question raised by Mr. Park about what type of potential traffic control device we might be using if we get to that point on Florida.
On?
Florida, yeah, not on Florida, on the 250 intersection, yeah.
Well, at 250, I think the community, both the city and the county, long-term envision that will at some point become a signalized intersection because it is a four-way intersection. The timing of that and who pays for it remains to be seen, but right now, my understanding is that the intersection is functioning acceptably with the four-way stop configuration that the county installed. The county, I don't know how long it's been, but previously, East Animas was a through street, and the stops were at Metz Lane and County Road 252, 32nd Street, but the county didn't make that a four-way intersection, I think just because of the amounts of traffic, and that is enabling it to function at an acceptable level right now and in the foreseeable future.
But you're seeing it go to a light eventually.
Well, again, that's always been discussed, but how far out that is, a lot may depend on what, if anything, happens with properties further to the north off of County Road 250. And at one time, several years ago, there were some pretty major developments being proposed out there.
Right.
They went away, but they're still in the city's long-term plan anyway.
Could you comment on the Florida connection as well, how that would go? Is that all governed by the universal traffic code or whatever it is that you?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of the city's code utilizing CDOT information and CDOT design standards. That's a little bit different intersection because it would be a three-legged intersection. Obviously, I think Metz Lane will be in a stopped configuration pulling on to Florida. The things that have been discussed are left turn lanes, left turn pockets, those types of things, similar to what you see in the approved section of Florida Road further to the west of County Road 250, where you've got basically a continuous center turn lane.
Do we see further clarity on that as this PD moves forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the actual design issues need to be addressed before the preliminary plan gets designed, because the preliminary plan, as per the condition, needs to include designs for that intersection improvement. And the developers will be responsible per the condition for installing those improvements, but then they would also get credits to the city's major street impact fees for any cost of improvement over and above just a normal intersection at that location. So if they need to do acceleration, deceleration lane, turn lanes, those types of things, they can be offset by credits to the street impact fees for each of the units in the project.
And how long would the developer be held responsible for that cost? If they needed the lighting or other street improvements that we don't know about yet?
Well, long-term down the road, installation of traffic signals typically becomes the responsibility of the governmental entity, whether it's the city or county cooperating. That's pretty much what happened with the Florida Road improvements that led to the light at that intersection. What we would get out of this project is identifications of what improvements immediately would be necessary to make that intersection with Metz Lane to Florida Road functioning. Long-term down the road, as other properties develop and traffic increases, then that's where it gets a little trickier and becomes generally a community responsibility more so than a single developer.
Just noted, as Mr. Ross noted, I mean, we now have 2 points of egress, which eliminates the impact on the Florida Road intersection.
Yeah,
at the developer cost of whatever needs to happen.
Yeah, we have had and have required to allow Mountain Trace 1 to build the number of units they've built in there. They've needed to maintain an acceptable emergency access back out to Florida Road.
Okay.
And we actually, this last winter, because of the amount of snow, I think for the first time in several years, it became blocked and there was some concern, and we had to go to the developers and say, it's your responsibility to keep that open, so that if there is an emergency, the fire trucks or the emergency providers have a way to get in and out, and they were able to do that. Once the street is built to city street standards and taken on and accepted by the city, then that maintenance responsibility becomes the city's, not the developers. So that's a benefit to the developers of having that developed to city street standards.
At this point, yeah.
Yeah.
And any, potential light, as you mentioned, at Metz and Florida Road would be triggered, not by this project, but by the entirety of County Road 250 growth and that kind of thing. So that's why it becomes, unless it's particularly triggered by this project, which I don't believe it would be, just by a traffic light, that would become a municipal investment at a later date. About this mixture of amenities between Mountain Trace 1 and 2, I mean, I don't have the history it's a long history, number one. But that, you know, between the merger and utilization of common elements, is it the developer's intent to create, as was discussed, common elements, or is there intent to have these things separated, such as trails and
Yeah,
playgrounds?
within Mountain Trace 1, there's an internal path system that's to be developed, and there was to be some amenities provided. Now, whether or not those become available for the use by residents in Mountain Trace 2 and/or timber trails, I'm not really sure, and I would defer to the developer's representative. My understanding from a discussion we had today is that their intent now is to create 2 separate and distinct homeowners associations, separate and distinct from Mountain Trace 1. They may have to work together because the drainages from each of these developments flow through and into one another. So there may have to be some shared maintenance responsibilities or identifications there. But my understanding is, at least right now, their intent is Timber Trails will have its own homeowners association. Mountain Trace 2 will have a separate homeowners association. There's an existing HOA in Mountain Trace 1. As far as the split of who has availability to utilize any of the amenities, I think that needs to be worked out, and certainly can be as this moves further through the process. The Mountain Trace 2 development, if you look at it, I think the design intent will be it would look like an extension of Mountain Trace 1, so there may not be the same issue there. And again, I think the concern that the neighbors have is what happens if there's trespass outside of the boundaries, and one HOA points to the other and say it's their folks that are creating the problem, it's not ours, kind of thing. We can work that out as it goes through the process. That's one of the benefits of the PD process, is it's a multi-stage review, gives the developer some sense of what they can at least hopefully expect as a top-end density before they go to the major expenses at the engineering costs involved in a development. But it also gives the neighborhood multiple opportunities to review what's been submitted and establish a comfort level with them for a project, especially projects of this magnitude.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Do we have any further response from the developer's representative? Okay. I'll close the public hearing. And do we have a motion to approve item 8.2.1?
Let's go to discussion.
I was going to do the motion second.
Motion and then discussion.
Okay.
We need 3 motions here.
I'm trying to
I think
find it up
just
here.
one. I'm actually.
It's on the first section in the bottom of the page.
Or I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to approve the Mountain Trace 2 and Timber Trails rezoning, ROW abandonment and planned development conceptual plan, subject to the findings and conditions as recommended by the Planning Commission, as reflected in the Planning Commission staff report and minutes of the April 22nd, 2019 Planning Commission meeting, and further direct the city attorney to prepare rezoning and ROW abandonment ordinances to be finalized as part of the final development plan approval process.
Second.
Any further discussion by council?
But, you know, I personally don't know, you know, if the intent is to separate to, as Craig described, and perhaps the developer has a different opinion, but 2 different sets of amenities, then, you know, I think the requested fence, the evaluation of that fence is something that should continue to be evaluated. And I know the Planning Commission has taken a look at it, but, you know, I respect the concerns, and, you know, and that's something that I don't think has been addressed by the developer White, is what the intent is. If it is a package of common amenities, then it's all one happy two homeowners associations, and they need to work it out. If it's distinctly 2 sets of amenities by 2 different populations, then I don't think it's unreasonable to consider a fence And so I'd just like that to be perhaps an additional condition, not to demand a fence, but to resolve that in the fence, further consideration of a fence is all I'm asking for.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that comment with further clarity in the PD process. I actually grew up in a neighborhood that was exactly like this, where there was a phase 1 and a phase 2, and there were 2 different homeowners associations. And I can tell you that all of the 15 years that my family lived there, there were battles between both about which amenity I could go and sneak into or not sneak into, or get in trouble sneaking into, or whatever it was. And so further clarity about how that works within the process would be helpful to the neighbors in the future, I'm sure, and also for the privacy concerns of whose property is what, and how does it work. Really, it would be great to see more clarity as this goes forward.
You may then want to add an additional condition to that effect as part of the conceptual plan considerations, and not preclude perimeter fencing if in fact whatever comes out of the preliminary plan stage, just ask for clarification regarding the setup for the HOAs as part of the preliminary plan submittal and details.
And can we also look at whether or not the traffic calming measures can be looked at, or at least requested as part of the preliminary? You said it would, but I just want to make certain that happens. And to Mr. Park's concern about the study of the potential traffic impacts.
I believe that is a current.
It will be a condition? Okay, I missed
Yeah,
that.
that was incorporated
In the 22?
one of the 22 conditions.
Okay.
Conditions 6, 7, and 8 were intended to address concerns about traffic, requiring the consultation with the city engineer about what exactly he feels is going to be necessary to make the determinations and those types of things. Again, as far as traffic calming, I certainly think we can take a look at that again. The configuration of the street with the twists and turns and stop signals, and also some of the grades that are going to be associated, I think will naturally limit the speeds that can happen in there. And I know our snowplowers don't particularly like speed bumps and those types of things, but we will make sure that I pass that on to the city engineer to take a look at traffic calming, and the applicant's engineer is here too, and he could take a look at it as part of the street design.
So I mentioned during one of the Planning Commission reviews of this project that one of my concerns is traffic further down the road, down Florida Road at East 3rd Avenue, 15th, and that area. So any development that goes on that accesses either Florida Road or 250 does have impact further down the pipeline. And I'd like to have these things considered as things develop more on those 2 roads. Eventually, that will have a significant impact on that intersection, as well as the impact on 15th and Camino, and 14th and Camino, which, so I just want to make that in everybody's awareness, and to think about that, and to consider the impacts, and to know that at some point in time, it'll reach a critical mass, which will have an impact.
I appreciate that comment. I've made the statement several times. If we, as planners and leaders, end up always coming to the muffler shop at a right turn only sign, we haven't done our job. And so that's the situation you're describing. And so I think we need to look ultimately at the entire traffic pattern coming down Purdue Road, how it impacts the intersection with Main.
And the 240 also.
Yes.
I mean, 250 also. So, thank you.
Excellent.
We need to amend that motion.
Can we have an amended motion? Yeah. You.
I don't have it here in front of me.
We had a motion to basically approve as was stated and I'd simply like to amend that motion to add the request for a evaluation of the common elements between Mountain Trace 1 and Mountain Trace 2 to determine whether a fence would be appropriate addition to that site plan.
And And wouldn't you also want clarity on the amenities as they exist between?
Thank you, thank you. And sentence 2 would be clarity on the amenities provided by both Mountain Trace 1 and Mountain Trace 2, and what would be common amenities, if any.
Second.
Ms. Phillips, may we have a roll call?
Yes. Counselor Baxter?
Yes.
Counselor Berkey?
Yes.
Counselor Patine?
Yes.
Counselor Noseworthy?
Yes.
Mayor Youssef?
Yes. Excellent. Moving on to 8.2.2, a public hearing to consider the preliminary plan review of the 238 East Village project at 738 County Road 238.
Good job.
Good evening, councilors. Mark Williams, Community Development Department, and welcome especially to our new councilors. This is a preliminary plan review for 238 East Village. Here's a location map. So we're talking about an acre of land between the Valle de Merced Mercy Housing Project and the now defunct Durango Recovery Center. In Fort Lewis, if this map had topos, it would show that this is about 80 feet above the level of the road, so it doesn't really factor into what's going on down here. Future land use is medium density for both of the neighbors. This is the property down here, so the Durango Recovery Center, Mercy Housing, some of the other developments, and then gets even denser the farther north you go by Hillcrest and Fearing Way. This is what we're talking about tonight, 10 single-family homes. There is an entrance drive off of Gigline Gulch Road that comes in this way with 5 houses facing that first entrance road. And then there's a T Street which runs north-south and 5 houses on the east side of that road. So these renderings are pretty close to what the architect intends to build, although if they have a buyer who wants to have a brown house instead of a gray house, I think that would be okay. But clearly it shows the intent in terms of the materials, the color palette, the size of the houses, the design, so you get a feel for what's going to be built there. Here's a site plan of the site. This shows snow storage areas. Here's a main snow storage area off of the north-south road. There's a smaller one down here. The reason it's smaller is because trash and recycling is collected down here. There are also sites for snow storage over here between the houses at the entrance, so there are quite a few spaces. One of the, probably the biggest difference between the conceptual plan, which came at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and this plan is the addition of a sidewalk. The original plan had a pattern or colored concrete strip next to the same grade as the entrance drive. Staff didn't like that, so we asked for a sidewalk. Now there's a sidewalk. It's built to a standard height, curb and gutter 6 inches. This is a PD, plan development process. We're in the second stage. We've done the conceptual. We're now doing the preliminary. And then the final is a more detailed, typically staff level review. Council approved the conceptual plan in February. That was a unanimous vote. For 10 houses with a private drive, as I said, it's still very similar to what council saw originally. The Planning Commission approved this preliminary plan at its meeting last month, 5-0. And just remember that this is, we're looking at the plan development, so we're looking at the site details, but this is also wrapped up with an annexation and an initial zoning. So when this first came to Planning Commission and Council, both bodies approved recommendation or approved the annexation and the zoning. Now we're doing the site details at the last step we'll get all the site details wrapped up, and then we'll have an annexation ordinance that will require approval before the project is finalized. PDs are tailored zone districts that allow more flexibility than regular zones, but they still have to have some relationship to our standards. In other words, you can't propose to build 40-foot tall houses. The plans do comply with our land use plan density and our land use standards, and they also comply with the state and local annexation requirements. Staff supports the plan because it advances the goals of the housing plan and the comprehensive plan to provide new infill for sale housing. And at the PD stage where we are right now, staff have been looking in more detail at items such as utilities, the stormwater detention and water treatment areas, the access, dimensional standards for the houses, and then some of the other features you can see. Because this is an annexation in PD, at the end of this process, staff, or the city rather, and the applicant will enter into a plan development and annexation agreement, which will clarify what's shown on the plan in terms of how many units there are, some general statements about the quality of design, colors of the houses. More importantly, probably, is the operational aspects. Because this is a PD and it's a hammerhead street, this means that the homeowners will be responsible for plowing the snow themselves, although the city will pick up the trash, and DFPD will provide emergency services. So generally, the home designs and materials are contemporary. They comply with the city's general color palette. We'd like to have darker tones. We used to say earth tones, but now we include blue, so that's really a water tone, but I think you understand what I mean. One of the things that did change was staff recommended or asked that the height be lowered on some of the houses. On the east side of the farthest street from the entrance, as you can see, this is built into the slope, this slope, which goes all the way up. It's part of Raider Ridge. So the architect incorporated a two-car garage under each of the units here. These, by the way, have one-car garages. So the architect incorporated a two-car garage, which means the houses are going to be taller. So there are 2 floors, and residents can access either from the front through this staircase, or internally there's a staircase at the rear of the house. So any house with a gable, this one shows 2, will be 35 feet. Originally it was a little over 37. We felt that was a little bit too tall. 35 feet is the height limit in Sky Ridge, it has the same sort of topographical challenges, and it's just down the street. These are also next door to the Valle de Merced apartments, which are actually not that different in style, but they're apartments, they're denser multifamily, and so these are a little bit taller, and we felt that reducing the volume and the size of the houses was a better fit architecturally, saying these are single-family houses. The houses are not large. They're 1,400 to 1,500 square feet. They all have 3 bedrooms. They all have garages. The houses with one-car garages will also have surface spaces elsewhere in the development. And I believe I covered the 3rd bullet point. This is the 4th public hearing we've had for this project. We haven't received any public comment at any point during this. Here's some more close-up views of the houses. So one of the other, I wouldn't say concern, but features that the staff looked at was, for single-family homes, we like to have the mass of the front of the house broken up. And we felt that the porches on each of these 5 houses does that. They have substantial roofs, and they do enough to break up the feel of the house. What we don't want is just a flat facade that's, flat this way and flat this way. So if it was just something like a staircase with a small roof, a small roof over a small entrance, maybe something small like a Juliet balcony, that would not be adequate. But we have approved this same kind of design in the past, so we're not setting any kind of precedent or breaking new ground. These are the elevations. As I said, this says 37 feet, but these will be 35 feet to the high point of the gable roofs. The shed roofs are a little bit lower. And then the 5 houses west of that easternmost street are substantially lower, a little over 26 feet for the gable, and then the shed roof is even lower than that. Plan developments such as this need to submit a tree replacement plan. So they identified all of the trees that are larger than 10 inches in caliber. And they also submitted a landscaping plan, and their landscaping plan is adequate to meet the formula in the Land Use and Development Code for replacing trees. That, by the way, includes street trees. You're allowed to count those for that replacement. Some of the conditions that we had at the conceptual plan were the detailed engineering structural review of the retaining wall east of the road. Utility studies, we have those. A fair share proposal, we have a fair share proposal. I'll get into that on the next slide. The project was not to exceed 10 units, it's 10 units. And then the applicant has been working with our drainage engineer. Fair share, the way the fair share code is written, an applicant has 3 options. They can either donate land, they can build an affordable unit, or they can make a fee in lieu payment. So this has 10 units. So it's 10 units, and per the code that equates to 1.6 fair share units. You have to pay or provide 16% of the total in fair share housing. There's a formula that was adopted in 2009. Every year, Homes Fund sends us updated numbers. That includes HUD numbers, census data, home sales data for price of homes. So anyway, that's a little background, but for 10 units at 3 bedrooms per unit is the average size. It's a little over $89,000. And that will be incorporated into the annexation agreement as well as a separate agreement. So that'll be referenced in 2 places in the PD agreement, and then also in a fair share agreement. And it's typical for an applicant to pay that fair share fee at the time of building permit. So when they pay their water fee, sewer fee, street impact fees, we add that as another fee. This is the recommended action, and this seems to get longer over the years as we try to be more comprehensive. And I even added a small clause to this from what's in the staff report, so I just wanted to point that out. So the recommended action is to approve the 238 East Village preliminary plan, and I added with conditions as listed, and direct the applicant to submit the final plan for staff review. Have the mayor sign the final plan Mylars at the appropriate time, which would be after the final plan review by staff. And direct the city attorney to prepare the annexation ordinance for the first reading after final plan approval.
Could you go back 1 slide for a moment? There was a thing we didn't discuss here, the trail access required from
right.
property to power line trail.
Okay. Yeah, so we need to have trail access to, back up. We want to have trail access for all the residents for all of these neighborhoods. Valle de Merced has dedicated open space. So actually, I'm glad you pointed that out. We'll either have it through here using the trail that's already been established, or the applicant will need to create another trail to the edge of their property and link up with this. if you wanted to, you could add a more specific condition of approval, because that's currently not a condition of approval.
Yeah, I just would not like to see two trails going up there. I'd rather see them combined into
And
one.
I agree that, yeah, the less erosion and such. So the goal right now is to get the trail connected to the Valle de Merced, or access internal connected to this trail and then up to the power line trail.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any further questions by council? Thank you. Mr. Chair. Thank you. Do we have an applicant or developer that would like to present? No? Okay. Do we have any public testimony for this?
Do not.
Okay, here we go again. All right, I will close the public testimony. Other further questions by council?
Go to the motion because you had
Yeah.
added something to it. Thank you.
I have just one comment
Yeah.
from my fellow councilors, and that's nothing, no criticism of this particular project, except to just, this is an easy math example of the fair share. At 10 units, this developer would typically need to provide 16% of this project as an affordable housing project, so that would be, in this case, 2 units out of 10. And in lieu of that, he has the ability to write a check for $89,000. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, whether that's fair or not fair, but that's what is being proposed and is typically the solution for a developer to provide money in lieu of the actual units constructed within the project. So it has nothing to do with the approval of this project. I just want to make it as a point of clarification.
I think it's a good point, though, that maybe the whole process of what we're trying to achieve with affordable housing and the in lieu fees and everything get revisited to see whether or not they're effective in achieving the goals that we have as a community.
I would agree. Thank you.
And Dean, you mentioned that at the housing study session. I recall you questioning that, whether or not it's just an easy payoff or not an easy payoff, but a payoff in lieu of, and whether or not we need to start looking at really requiring those units to be built.
That's correct. Thank you.
Do we have a response by staff? Okay. Yes, please. Further response from the applicant, absolutely.
Yeah, so,
Can you identify yourself?
I'm sorry, Tracy Reynolds, 1140 Main Avenue. So that in lieu of fee adds about $9,000 to the price of each unit. Our alternative is to actually build an affordable unit. And I am doing that in the East Side Lofts project on the corner of 8th and College. And it's been a difficult process, and it's given me a lot of heartburn. I've gotten comments from the Homes Fund that they would rather see the in lieu of fee than see us build affordable units because there's just too many hoops to jump through. If we were to actually build an affordable unit on that site, it would cost us at least double what that in lieu of fee is. So it's not really a win-win either way. I wish there were better ways to fund that. The Homes Fund, the functions that they serve, if there was some sort of a real estate transfer fee, it would be spread over to 10 times as many transactions. Right now, you're putting all of that fee, all of that burden on new housing. Drives up the price of new housing, which also drives up the comps for resales of older housing. It drives up the price of housing in general. And that's my opinion. Take it or leave it.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank
So I will say that I don't believe that the Homes Fund is the only vehicle we have to achieve this goal. And also, a real estate transfer tax currently is not available to us given the legal ramifications in the state of Colorado. So we have not as many tools in the toolbox as we'd like to have. But I think that the whole system needs to be looked at, and I'm not just speaking specifically to Homes Fund and the fees you pay, it's the whole system of promoting affordable housing.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing. Do we have a motion to approve item 2.2.2?
I can make the motion to approve the 238 East Village preliminary plan and direct the applicant to submit final plan for staff review, have the mayor sign the final plat Mylars at the appropriate time, and direct the city attorney to prepare the annexation ordinance for the first reading after the final plan approval.
I think you also want to add with conditions as listed.
Conditions.
So noted with conditions as listed.
Second?
Any further discussion by council? Ms. Phillips, may we have a roll call?
Counselor Baxter?
Yes.
Counselor Patine?
Yes.
Counselor Noseworthy?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brookie?
Yes?
And Mayor Youssef.
Yes. Okay, moving on to council reports and actions. Item number 11. Do we have any councilors that would like to report tonight?
Start at this end?
Well, does it have to go in any particular order?
No?
Okay.
I'd be glad to
Go
start.
ahead.
Well, number one, tomorrow night, about this time, I'll be a speaker at the police academy. And let's see, I had that up. Sorry. The graduation for the Citizens Police Academy. And unlike popular thought, it's not a movie. It's actually in Durango. It's the Citizens Police Academy, which began in April 1998. And the Citizens Police Academy is a 12-week program designed to increase understanding between citizens, the police, and through education. Durango Police Department's philosophy of community-oriented policing seeks to create partnership with its citizens. This philosophy promotes mutual trust and cooperation between citizens and police in a common goal of providing quality of life and a safe and secure community for all citizens. That said, we've got 18 people that have just spent the past 13 weeks, I believe. It's a fairly extensive program. It starts early in the year, and tomorrow night will be their graduation. So I'm looking forward to having some words from the City Council to share with them. The other item, last Thursday night, after our first day of our retreat, Councilor Noseworthy and I attended a dinner with the Colorado Space Coalition. And I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, or,
go ahead.
But what the Colorado Space Coalition is a consortium in the state of Colorado, primarily executives represented in Durango, but from Teledyne Corporation, Lockheed Martin. And they were here doing a number of things. They were specifically looking at Agile Space, which is our local aerospace firm, which creates thrusters for satellites currently in orbit. And Daddy Barnes is the founder of Agile Space, and his new CEO is in attendance. They'd also been to talk with the high school kids for our Durango High School crack aerospace team that's nationally renowned. And they had been up to Fort Lewis College Engineering Department to look at the opportunities for connection between Colorado Space Coalition and Fort Lewis College. So with that, you made a bit of trivia. Colorado is second only to California in number of aerospace jobs. And so they were looking really focused at what Durango has to offer for the future of the aerospace industry. So
Excellent.
thanks
Thank
for
you.
Barbara for joining me in that evening.
So this weekend is two really exciting things. The Iron Horse Bicycle Classic and Purgatory is open for skiing.
Right.
So those two seem a little interesting juxtaposition, but I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of it, and also that there is traffic control on Saturday morning for the Iron Horse on Highway 550. So if you're headed up to Purg, just be aware of that. Thank you.
Councilor Patine?
I'm going to pass. Thank you.
I actually would like to say a few things. 2 points. On Sunday, my husband and I volunteered at the Taste of Durango, and what a great community event that is. And we worked the gate checking IDs, and we met people from Pagosa Springs and as far away as New Zealand. So I just want to give a huge thanks to the people who organize, volunteer, and work, especially our police and fire professionals, to make Taste of Durango a success. I'd also like to make a few comments about our council retreat last week. I encourage everyone to listen to the discussion that took place, the audio of which is available at durangogov.org. Our retreat was an example of our democracy at work. Even though the discussions may be difficult and the process of coming to a consensus takes time, ours is still a remarkable form of government. The mayor has made restoring trust in our city government a priority for this year. And during the retreat, 2 council members questioned the legitimacy of my concern that there's been an erosion of public trust of city management here in Durango. And let me state emphatically that I expect and hope to be challenged, always in a respectful manner, by my colleagues and constituents. That valuing differing views and challenging our leaders' thinking is vital to our democratic process. During the retreat, my colleagues shared their experiences during the campaign, that there will always be a handful of people who reach out to candidates to promote their special interest agenda, and sometimes they are the same people from campaign to campaign. But my experience was different from what they described. I explained that a significant number of people, during brief encounters and during scheduled interviews with me, shared their concerns and experiences about city management. I conveyed that I felt I must discuss the community concerns brought to my attention with my fellow council members in the appropriate forum, and to do so soon. By way of explanation to the community, I had hundreds of conversations with constituents during my campaign, at house parties, 12 forums, and networking events, and by knocking on thousands of doors. People shared their concerns and hopes with me and my volunteers who joined me in reaching out to our community. I also conducted scheduled hour-long interviews with 86 people from all walks of life, of which 3/4 of those people I did not know. In these meetings, I covered 4 broad topics. 1, the person's experience in Durango, what they valued about our community. 2, the issues they were concerned about. 3, what did they want Durango to look like in the future? And 4, any questions I didn't ask or topics they would like me to be aware of. Let me emphasize that I promised the people I interviewed in these conversations that their conversations with me were confidential and that I would not attribute their statements to them. And this is a commitment I will honor. What troubles me is that so many people consistently conveyed a similar account of their personal experience with city management. This community feedback concerns me, and I believe my fellow council members should be made aware of this information and that we should discuss it as a council in a proper forum. I am calling for scheduling of the appropriate forum for us to discuss as a council the current concerns and experiences many people shared with me about city management. And I believe we need to do this at the soonest possible time. Council members, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my views on why I believe we need to work to restore public trust. Mayor Youssef, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Noseworthy. I think I would just follow up and suggest, I thank you for your comments. I would just suggest that we do have on our agenda for next Tuesday, May 28th, an agenda item that will talks about next steps for our future evaluation system, and I would suggest that that would be a good opportunity for us to talk about next steps and how we will address the concerns that you just raised.
Thank you.
I would also like to add that we had a productive retreat. I also wanted to add one other item, a couple other items. First of all, let's hear from our city manager. He's going to give us an update on the April sales tax.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. These figures represent sales that occurred in March, I think, and their sales tax is down 1.5%, and for the year we are up 0.2%. Lodger's tax was down 9.6%, and year-to-date is up 3.5%. So not as strong as we would like, but that's what it is.
Thank you. I also wanted to add that we have added some onboarding sessions starting this week, May 22nd, on Wednesdays at 2:30 p.m. to provide some information to our new counselors as well as get some of us updated on various topics that we want to have kind of some further deeper dives on. This first one starting tomorrow, 5/22, 2:30 p.m. here, is a study session to talk about organic parks, and our police chief will be present to talk about some of the police department updates, I believe. And then we will not have one, as far as I know, on the following week, on the 29th, and on June 5th, we'll be talking about homelessness. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. Our next meeting is Tuesday, June 4th. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you. That is loud.
It's nice, I like it.